I'm Claire. We don't have to look at a picture of my face. You can do that in real life. So I'm going to continue the thread that Nick was going along there about how we work with our stakeholders, but I'm going to look at it from the other side of the coin. So where you might have stakeholders who are not into the detail, very much focused on the big picture. What happens if you have a stakeholder set who are very focused on the detail and lose sight of the vision? So that's what we're going to talk about over the next 15 minutes or so. Some of what I talk about might feel a bit back to basics at times. I promise that I'm getting to the point. And this is very much rooted in some of the most common challenges that we hear from people like yourselves, from your peers in the industry. But I'll start with a story about my life before impression. Not all of it, don't worry. But I started here at about 6 months ago, I guess. And I came from an agency where I worked on, I'm going to try and describe this without giving it away. I worked on a big financial services brand. You will all know who they are. I'm not going to give you the name. Probably a lot of you will have used them as well at some point. Massive TV advertiser, but very much a digitally first business. So they grew up really through digital. You can only buy what they sell digitally. You can't call anybody even if you wanted to. And that's important context because when I was onboarding onto the account about 2 years ago, I was chatting with their head of performance at the client side, doing as most excitable strategists do, going through all these great ideas that I had, all these tests that I wanted to run, ways that we were going to improve their performance. And he said, yeah, settle down. That all sounds great, but what you're talking about, we've thought about before. And I don't think it's going to work because in the short term, it's just going to have too big of an impact on our PPC efficiency. And I initially thought that he'd misunderstood what I was saying. I was like, yes, it probably will have an impact in the short term on your PPC efficiency. But what I'm talking about is the holistic approach to performance. And what I want to test is whether over sort of a medium or longer term, these tests will improve your overall performance efficiency, not just isolated to PPC. And he went, yeah, I get it. But we report monthly our PPC efficiency numbers to the board, and any fluctuation, certainly any decline in that efficiency, they just don't want to see it. So we have to sell in those tests ahead of time, and it's just going to be really hard. So all sounds great, but I'm really sorry. This is just going to be too long of a process, and we need to keep these headline numbers consistent and efficient. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is like, I cannot stress highly enough. You will have probably seen the ads in the last month. A massive advertiser, very mature marketing mix, but making decisions based on a sort of, I understand it, like a legacy process where they've gotten used to relying on these short-term metrics to determine what they consider to be success. And it certainly is success in the short term, but ultimately they're making long-term decisions based on that short-term mindset. And whilst I'm sure nobody in this room is making long-term decisions based on short-term data, I want to spend the next sort of 10 minutes or so talking about how we overcome that mindset in our organizations, because whilst that may not apply entirely to us in this room, you might recognize some of the characters or some of the language in that story, whatever sort of size or scale our own organization is. And ultimately, we want to avoid making warped decisions based on incomplete data or evidence, incorrect evidence that stands in the way of us actually growing the business in a sustainable and effective way. So this is typically one of the biggest pushbacks that we get is that in taking a longer term view, we can't take our eye off the ball of what's been driving the short-term success of the business, because we've become reliant on that consistency and efficiency of custom through the business that typically performance tends to deliver. And then connected to that is, I guess, an investment question, right? If we've become very used to efficient investment in performance tactics, and when we test those kind of longer term plays, they're just not as efficient. So why would I be investing my money in those things that just aren't delivering in the short term? Both good points. Let's answer them now. People familiar with this phrase, performance plateau? Yeah, a few nods. Hands up if you are familiar with it. Yeah, a few hands. A couple of hands not raised. So just for the owners of the hands who weren't raised then, performance plateau is what we tend to talk about, certainly on LinkedIn, as this. It tends to happen when we over-rely on performance tactics to drive that efficiency of custom through the business. But what we tend to be doing is really just focusing on people who are in a purchase mindset, or like credit card in hand. I don't know if you can see this little emoji down here. Maybe the screen isn't quite big enough. People who are ready to make a decision, hopefully with us, performance tactics get them over the line, becoming a customer. The performance plateau happens really when we don't consider that this is not a limitless supply of people who are ready to become our customer. Contrary to what some of our product devs or founders or senior stakeholders might believe, there's no bottomless pit of demand, right? So once we've done the very efficient thing of getting people over the line, this diminishes. And then what happens? That becomes much harder to get anybody over the line if they're not there in the first place. Performance starts to plateau. That solid ground that we thought we had, efficient performance media, starts to get really shaky, terrible, terrifying. Now what? So what we're talking about when we're talking about a contribution mindset is thinking about how we get people from being a potential customer, so not yet credit card in hand, ready to make a decision, down this customer journey to the point where our performance tactics can do that job of efficiency, sweep them up, get them over the line, converting into being a customer. So when we're talking about a contribution mindset, we're thinking about this whole journey. Performance is focused here, super efficient, reliable consistency of custom, but your total marketing effectiveness, particularly when you're maturing your marketing strategy, needs to involve the whole thing, how we're getting people from here to here effectively so that our performance is efficiently sweeping up and getting people over the line. So really what we're doing when we're thinking about this all the way through that journey is we're thinking about future-proofing the efficiency of our performance. Effective media choices here, so we can maintain and future-proof the performance efficiency here. So that's the first answer to that challenge that we get, is we need to keep sight of the longer-term approach so that we're future-proofing the performance efficiency. Second point that I mentioned earlier is that thing about investment. This bit is just not as efficient at doing this. That's true, it's not. But it's also not trying to do that. So these two jobs are different, and really there are probably more jobs in here, but certainly this half of your marketing strategy is doing a very different thing to this half. And again, it's that effectiveness piece that we're focusing on here. And so that's when we're starting to think about some of the things that the guys were talking about earlier in the session, how we're starting to bring in incrementality testing, MMMs, and all the other techniques and tools in our measurement arsenal to measure the total effectiveness of our campaign and not just the performance efficiency there. So not only are we future-proofing our approach at this end of the funnel, but we are making sure that we are driving efficient effectiveness on this half of the equation here. But to keep ourselves honest with that, we need to make sure that we are measuring the right objectives when we're talking about this effectiveness piece here. And so we're going to do that with a holistic measurement framework. We start with good objectives. So here are some objectives that I made earlier. Some of them might feel resonant with you guys. You might be tasked with some of these things. Do we think these are good objectives? Yeah? Some sort of nods and grimaces. I'm not going to call anybody out. It's kind of a trick question. They're sort of good. This one's definitely good, business objective. The point is, these are all different kinds of objectives based on different points of our marketing strategy, right? And these are all going to play different jobs in our holistic measurement framework. A good holistic measurement framework should be linked. These should all be linked to one another, and these two should be born out of this one. So our business objective is the bigger long-term ambition that we're all trying to point towards in our organization. What should then be happening is with your humble strategist or your internal research team or whoever it is that you're working with, yourselves often, we should be diagnosing the problem, what's standing in our way of reaching our business objective, and devising a marketing objective based on that, which will then lead us into how we actually deliver our media to support that. So the marketing objective is what's going to influence us hitting the business objective. The media objective is what's going to influence us delivering the marketing objective, right? So it has to go in that direction, right? These two born out of this. You probably will actually have more than one. And you probably will, certainly based on a more mature, as your marketing mix matures, you definitely will have more marketing objectives than you do business objectives, and then media objectives to follow. The point is, again, just to really labour it, they should all be connected. So assuming that we want to increase revenue by a certain amount, we might have worked together and decided that in order to do that, that converts to a certain number of sales. But in order to reach that certain number of sales, we've looked at our conversion funnel and decided that we also need to raise awareness by this much in order to deliver that many sales. And in order to do that, to deliver that many sales with our budget, we need to be achieving this sort of CPA in order to raise awareness by that. You get the idea. So these all have to follow that thread of being guided by this, but ultimately linked to one another. So I'm not going to labour the point because I know we're getting to time, and I'm sure you can read this at your own leisure. These will be influenced by the specific dynamics and what's going on in your own business, in your own category, and so forth. But longer term, big ambition, what is driving the sole focus of the company. Medium term is the metrics that are going to influence the success of your big ambition. And then short term, we're thinking about media objectives, which we can plan and buy and optimize towards, which are going to deliver the medium term objectives and in turn the longer term. So putting that into a measurement framework, I've switched it around because we tend to like to read from short to long, from left to right. But this is where we're plotting that all on a matrix, and we're then starting to think about what we've heard about this morning from Aaron and Nick. So in the short term, our media objectives, we're typically looking at, again, in the example I used, reach and conversions. So we're typically looking in channel, maybe in the analytics platform, we might be looking at MTA and so forth. You're probably going to be thinking about that. Certainly in campaign, maybe reporting back weekly. In the medium term, in the previous example I used, awareness and sales. That's where you're starting to think about brand lift. You might get that in channel, you might get that third party. You're certainly thinking about incrementality here. You're doing that less frequently, maybe post-campaign, maybe monthly if it's a really long campaign. And then over the long term, if the goal is revenue, definitely MMM, definitely the broader, more holistic pieces that we've spoken about, and much longer timescales here, quarterly, biannually, some companies do, yearly, twice yearly. But the point is that we're not using this kind of thing to make decisions about this kind of thing. It has to take that structured approach. So just to sum from me, please don't use short-term metrics to make long-term decisions. I know it's easy to fall into that habit, but we need to get out of that mindset. We need to be setting distinct optimization metrics, which are based on our marketing objectives, which are based on our long-term business ambitions, not the other way around. And that all needs to come into a holistic measurement framework, which means that we're never losing sight of the short-term success, but it's just incorporated into a longer-term piece that helps us hit our overall business vision.